Hello, everybody, and welcome back to Tales from the Ranger's Grove, formerly the readings of the Legend of Drizzt. And that's important, because I started out this podcast reading that book series because I am a huge lover of fantasy. I have played fantasy games my whole life. I have been an avid Dungeons & Dragons player way back since the early days of its inception. And that is not going to change. I still love fantasy just as much as I did when I was a child, perhaps even more so now. I still play Dungeons & Dragons typically twice a week, or I'm playing different types of fantasy computer games online. I love the genre, and I know many people here love the genre just as much as I do, which is why you're here. And that's why all the books that I've read on the podcast by the indie authors who graciously donated their books for this purpose, or the stories that I've written. Well, mostly the stories. Some of the stories are horror. But let's be clear, the horror stories, they're not going to keep you up at night. These are not the same gory, creepy stories by some of the masters. These are more akin to Tales from the Crypt, a bit of a fun side. And that leads me to where we are now, the beginning of our new series, Tirondel Tales. Now, these are dedicated fantasy stories, all based on the mystical city of Tirondel. And Tirondel exists in a world of high fantasy, very akin to the world of Dungeons & Dragons. We just won't say that out loud. Wink, wink. Anyway, once the story is over, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can be involved in the Tirondel Tales community. So, if that interests you, then please hang out after the story's over. But now, let's begin with our very first story in the world of Tirondel.
Ah, there you are. Welcome to the Sword and Stave, the finest tavern in all of Tirondel City. Hang up your cloak, mind the puddle by the door, it's more ale than rain anyway, and find yourself a place by the hearth. Aye, closer, let the fire warm your bones and the shadows forget your name for a while. You've wandered far, and every traveler deserves a tale. So tell me, what sort do you seek tonight? A golden knight with honor too heavy to lift? A sorcerer so clever he magicked himself into a box? No. Aye, you've hunger for something sly, something that walks where it oughtn't and chuckles all the while. A thief, then. Good. I have just the tale. He wasn't the strongest, nor the kindest, and certainly not the most honest. But he was clever, and sometimes that's all the gods require to spin the world on its side. Jarrett was his name. Light-fingered, silver-tongued, and daft enough to attempt the impossible. To steal from an impossible vault with no walls, no locks, just a maw full of teeth. Come closer, and I'll tell you how it happened. This is no street corner snatch or jewel box pilfer. No. This is the tale of the frog heist.
The Sword and Stave sat squat and stubborn on a crooked corner of Copper Street, its timbered bones dark with years of pipe smoke, spilled ale, and stories whispered over bloodied tables. It was a mercenary's roost, a bard's haven, at a crossroads for every kind of trouble that passed through Tirondel. Here, adventurers came to forget, or to remember, to boast or to bleed. The fire was always lit, the coin was always good, and the rumors ran thicker than the stew. Like many things in Tirondel, its exterior was deceptive. Through the heavy oak door of the Sword and Stave was a vast common room, stretching like the nave of some great cathedral, but instead of saints and relics, its high beams bore banners of past patrons, faded coats of arms, several skulls, and the battered shields of mercenaries who had long since retired to the earth. The scent of roasting venison and spiced cider mingled with pipe smoke, wax, and the faint tang of metal from so many weapons at so many hips. A grand hearth, large enough to roast a boar whole, dominated one wall. Its flames sent flickering light up the polished beams darkened with age, and caught in the polished tankards of patrons seated at stained oak tables. The inn's namesakes, a greatsword as long as a man and a staff said to belong to some long-dead archmage, were crossed over the great hearth. They were undimmed by time and yet blended into the tavern, as if content with their retirement. Chandeliers hung overhead, heavy iron rings draped with 100 guttering candles, their wax forming stalactites over years of shedding light on deeds fair and foul. In a corner booth, half shrouded in the shadows cast by the hearth, sat Gerard. He nursed a clay cup of something expensive and red, swirling it with the amused menace of a cat watching birds. Lean-limbed and sharp-eyed, Gerard wore light leather armor, because one should never be incautious on the Tironian streets, and a well-fitted tunic of quality material, because one should never dress beneath oneself unless on a job. Gerard was a thief, not a cut-purse or a slum thug. No, Gerard was a thief of distinction. Petty theft bored him. Trinkets meant nothing. He only stole what could never be measured in gold alone, artifacts, heirlooms, and rarities with names and tales attached that dragged a weight of centuries. And he never stole within the soot-stained walls of the Sword and Stave. That was the one rule he held to in this city of soft morals and shifting allegiances. And yes, it was enforced by the guild itself, which made Gerard feel he should set a good example. There was even a subtle carved feline icon to Silvet that was a warning to all thieves that the tavern was neutral ground, like a temple or a graveyard. Gerard was not religious, and Silvet, the aloof cat god of thieves, did not expect him to be. However, you didn't steal from his patch. And no one crossed Kemple, the battle-scarred dragonborn taverner, either. Gerard watched Kemple as he polished a pewter tankard and watched his patrons. The taverner missed nothing, knew everything, but said naught. For a moment, Gerard felt the dragonborn's gaze sweep over him, and they made eye contact. There was that flicker of mutual respect, and Kemple's attention moved on. Nevertheless, thought Gerard, smiling into the wine, it was entertaining to imagine what he could steal if he ever decided to break that rule. His eyes flickered across the room. There, at the long table by the fire, was a bronze-clad Goliath war priest, helm at his feet, and a great mace leaning casually against his chair. The runes on its haft caught the firelight in a way that deepened the etchings. Old Kuranathi script, a relic of the Five Isles War, worth a fortune to the right collector. Beside him was a half-elf illusionist with rings on every finger, some fake, but not all. The one on her left index shimmered in ways Gerard recognized. Glamour-bound, rare, but he would need a closer look. And by the bar, a dwarven hunter laughed heartily, his cloak swaying with an unnatural presence. Protection? No, something more powerful. Gerard sipped his wine, his thoughts dancing through lockboxes and pressure triggers, smoke bombs and silent exits. It was an idle game, but a satisfying one. But he wouldn't steal from them, as easy and tempting as it might be. Not here. But gods, if he did. He leaned back, sinking into the shadows. Gerard's gaze slid past the hearth to the bar, where a dwarf and a human were in the middle of an overly loud conversation, the kind that carried whether they meant it to or not.
"No, you weren't watching the flank," the dwarf growled.
His beard was torn and patchy in places, and his armor crusted with swamp mud.
"That's why Biscuit's gone. He heard it before either of us saw a thing."
The human ranger, tall and wiry with the damp look of someone who crawled through marsh for hours, slammed her cup down.
"I told you it wasn't a troll. Those tracks were wrong. I said it. You ignored me."
The dwarf thumped his mug of ale on the table in retort.
"Your job is to say what it is, not what it isn't."
They fell silent for just long enough for the clatter of dice and murmurs from other tables to cover the worst of their grief. Jarrett watched them both with mild interest. The ranger took a long pull from her tankard, then said quieter,
"Froggermoth. That's what it was."
"Triple-eyed bastard,"
growled the dwarf.
"Took Beskin like—"
He snapped his fingers and glowered into his beer. Jarrett's eyes narrowed slightly. A froggy-moth. Not a creature known to stray near well-traveled roads, especially not the northern forest route, which merchants still used in summer. Rare. Vicious. Interesting and perhaps lucrative. Could it be the same froggy-moth that attacked Lord Fabragil about 20 years ago? Jarrett had a serious interest in history when it involved the owners of rare artifacts and their fates. He slid from his booth like smoke, his cup left half full. The two adventurers didn't see him until he was already there, resting one hand lightly on the back of the ranger's chair.
"Pardon me. I couldn't help but overhear,"
Jarrett said, in a tone as smooth as polished oak.
"Forest Road, Froggy Moth. That's not the sort of thing that Tirondel ignores."
The ranger glanced up, frowning.
"Who's asking? The law?"
"Gods forbid. I'm just someone interested in dangerous things, with interesting stories."
Jarrett offered a sliver of a smile.
"And willing to pay."
The dwarf snorted.
"You don't look like the sort who fights monsters."
"Oh, I don't,"
Jarrett replied.
"I follow them, quietly. I'm looking for something I believe it might have taken."
They exchanged a wary glance, but were curious. Money, after all, soothed wounds and calmed fears.
"You'll hire us?"
The dwarf asked slowly, then shook his head.
"Bah, that's suicide."
"Just take me to the site,"
Jarrett said.
"Nothing more. I want to see the lair. I'll pay 100 gold up front, and 100 more if I find what I'm after."
The ranger leaned back and folded her arms.
"You're mad."
Jarrett made a rueful face.
"You're not the first person to accuse me of that,"
he admitted. He needed something to tip the balance of their decision in his favor.
"As a bonus, I'll rescue Beskin, was it?"
The ranger blinked in shock.
"Aye, so you are mad. But if you can do that, I'm in."
She offered her rough hand.
Orala Halfhunter's the name.
Jarrett cocked an eyebrow as he took the hand.
"Just Jarrett."
"Just Jarrett, or Jarrett the Just?"
He found her smile infectious and laughed.
You know I'm a thief, right? So, Half-Hunter.
"No," the ranger shook her head.
"That's a story you've yet to earn."
The dwarf reached for his tankard, then looked Jarrett up and down.
"Biskin's dead,"
he began, but Jarrett cut in smoothly.
"Dead, yes, but not digested. You can give him a fine burial, or, if you have the favour of the high priest of the celestial host, then maybe you can raise him, but only if you're quick."
The dwarf grumbled into his beard for a moment, then nodded.
"Fine. Meet us at the north gate at dawn. Bring the gold. And keep up."
Jarrett bowed his head.
"I always do, but it'll have to be 10th bell. I have an errand to run first."
He turned and melted back into the tavern's shadowed edge, heart already ticking faster. Arala had been more right than she appreciated. This idea was mad. The morning mist veiled Tirondel's inner city as it rose from the lazy flow of the twin rivers. It created an illusion that the high towers and colorful pennants of the citadel floated in midair. On the opposite bank, the mist's clammy fingers climbed up the steep alleys and byways of Ridgeward, home of many of Tirondel's artisans. Jarrett moved briskly through the winding passages behind Glassmaker's Row until he reached a crooked little storefront that had no name, just a carved symbol above the lintel, a flame within a spiral. The door opened with a chime, but there was no bell attached. He breathed in the scent of old parchment, caustic vapors, and simmering power. Inside, the shop was a warren of narrow aisles, cluttered shelves, and hanging charms that swung slightly in a breeze that Jarrett couldn't feel. Runes glowed faintly from stones, and bottled whispers sat corked beside pots of enchanted inks. A homunculus blinked at him from a high perch and then scuttled up into the rafters. Behind the counter stood a woman wrapped in shawls of green and silver, hair like smoke, eyes like polished obsidian. She looked at Jarrett as though she'd been expecting him since yesterday.
"By my reckoning, you're late," she said.
"And I defer to your prescience,"
he replied with a grin.
"What am I late for?"
She smiled faintly but ignored the question.
"What are you hunting, Jarrett?"
"The Froggymoth that killed Lord Fabligil,"
he said.
"I need a ghost sigil and a sunstone. Do you have either?"
She didn't move at first, studying him instead.
"Interesting choices,"
she mused and then cocked her head.
"So, you're going after the Symphony of Stars?"
His grin widened.
"Maybe."
She nodded to herself and disappeared into the back of the shop. Glass clinked. Pots rattled. After a minute she returned, placing 2 items on the counter. A smooth piece of amber that shimmered faintly with an inner golden light, and a shard of etched bone bound in silver wire.
"These are old," she said. "The sunstone is still strong. The sigil," she grimaced and shrugged, "a little fickle."
Jarrett hesitated.
"Just how fickle?"
The woman pursed her lips and stroked the bone.
"I wouldn't trust my life to it."
But that was exactly what Jarrett had in mind. He glared at the engraved bone, losing a little of his self-confidence, but not enough. He gave a curt nod.
"Well, you wouldn't trust your life to the Castellan of Tirondel herself,"
he countered amiably.
"I'll take the risk."
He laid a pouch of gemstones on the counter. Coins were never enough in this shop.
"Oh, and Jarrett, do come back with all your limbs,"
she said as he turned to leave. Jarrett called back over his shoulder.
"That depends on your ghost sigil."
Jarrett arrived at the frost gate in the northern city wall just as the last note of the 10th bell faded, cloak drawn tight against a brisk wind. Arala and the dwarf were already waiting.
"Thought you'd skip,"
the dwarf grunted.
"And miss out on a delightful swamp walk and possible evisceration?"
Jarrett said.
"Perish the thought."
The dwarf hefted his pack with a grunt.
"Name's Grundvar, by the way. Not that you asked."
"I know you dwarves only give your names when you're ready,"
Jarrett said, beaming.
"And now I know. I feel we're so much closer."
Arala chuckled and led the way out between the Turonian gate guards, who glanced at them with appropriate suspicion that they reserved for all adventurers. The forest road passed through a few farms and small villages, and by the second day they were into low woods and marshy thickets. Soon the forest rose around them, and the sun was veiled behind dappling leaves that rustled in the breeze.
"So,"
Grunvar said about an hour after noon,
"you know that froggy moths don't lair for long. They keep moving. So I've heard."
Arala frowned. "They are too rare to know for sure." Jared agreed with a nod.
This one, I think, has ranged over 100 miles in every direction, and that far north you could lose an army in that amount of forest if you wanted to.
"So what's got you so interested?"
demanded Grunvar.
"I assume it's not charity for Beskin's sake."
The ranger shook her head at the dwarf's bluntness, but Jared could tell by the glance she threw him that she wanted to know too. He had to be careful not to reveal too much, but he was also aware that a reputation for dealing honestly with adventurers was important.
I meant what I said. I only need you to help me find it.
He reiterated.
But let me share a little tale with you. 20 years ago, a froggy-moth, maybe this one, attacked the noble party of Lord Fabregil. He had done 5 years' duty guarding the northern frontier against orcs and all the goblinoid marauders beyond the mountains. His party was well armed, but it caught them by surprise. The froggy-moth plucked him from his horse with a single strike of its tongue, and he was gone.
Jared snapped his fingers, echoing Grunvar as he had lamented Beskin's fate back in the Sword and Stave.
A tragedy.
Jared sighed.
Lord Fabregil was a lover of music and astronomy. He had commissioned the creation of a fabulous gem, the Symphony of Stars. When the magic word was spoken, it projected out a sphere of stars and music. Truly wondrous.
Grunvar snorted in disgust.
"Bleh! You want to risk getting swallowed alive for some pretty notes and lights? Don't tell me this Fabregil. He was half-elven?"
Yes. How did you guess?
Asked Jared.
"A man freezes his arse off in a northern bastion, content with a bit of music, has to be mad, or part elven,"
stated Grunvar, firm in the superiority of the level-headedness of the dwarven race. Then he looked suspiciously at Jared.
"You look a bit pretty yourself. Got elf blood?"
On my mother's side?
The thief admitted with a shrug. Arala stroked her chin as she thought. "So you think you might find this gem in its lair, but it's probably got several abandoned lairs over 1,000 miles where it ranges." She looked at him sharply. "You're not that stupid, Jared. I've heard of you, and you have something else in mind." The thief grinned at them.
Just help me to find it. And if you want Beskin back, help me to get away.
Their banter faded into the hum of insects as they walked on. The forest was changing with a growing stillness in the trees. They reached the site just past dusk. Pools of water reflected the amber sky as the sun began to set and the shadows beneath the trees deepened. The stillness was only disturbed by the occasional hush of wind sighing through moss-heavy branches or a ripple in the black mud. Even the insects kept quiet as if anxiously watching and waiting. Arala waved ahead and spoke in a whisper.
"This is it. We were coming from that rise when it hit us. Beskin was scouting ahead, just down by that hollow."
Grunvar spat into the mud.
"Didn't even have time to draw steel."
The hollow she indicated was half flooded now, a broad bowl of water choked with weeds and broken branches. Beyond, the trees became fewer, and the pools started to connect up until there was a large span of swamp water stretching north and east. Something had churned up the banks, leaving huge gouges in the earth and shattered trees. There were drag marks that vanished into the murk. Jared crouched beside a fallen tree, running his gloved fingers along a deep impression in the mud.
big,
he murmured.
larger than I expected. About 20 feet high?
Aralla's watchful eyes never left the encroaching waters as she answered. No, I would say closer to 25. Jarrett gave a low whistle.
Told ya, Grunvar said grimly. Its tongue shot out faster than a ballista's bolt. 1 second Beskin standing over there.
The dwarf pointed to the rim of the hollow.
Next, he's gone.
Did it take the body whole?
Jarrett asked without looking up. Aralla nodded. Didn't even chew.
Then there's a good chance this'll work,
he said, straightening and rubbing his chin thoughtfully. Grunvar gave him a sideways look.
A chance of what working?
Jarrett did not expect the monster to have moved on quickly. It was here or nearby. He reached into his coat and pulled out the sunstone. The deep amber pulsed faintly in the gloom, casting long golden shafts between the trees.
Of finding what I came for,
he answered, his attention fixing on the dark pools of swamp water.
I'll need you both to circle the hollow. Drive it out.
Hold on. You want us to poke the damn froggy moth?
Grunvar barked in angry astonishment.
I preferred the idea of finding its lair.
Unless you'd rather it surprise us again, we should make sure it's not still here waiting in ambush,
Jarrett said, calm as ever.
If Beskin's spirit lingers, then we've still got time to rescue him.
Aralla glanced at Grunvar, then back at Jarrett. Grunvar grumbled but hefted his axe.
Let's wake the fat bastard, then.
The three of them moved into position, weapons ready. The forest held its breath, and the water began to ripple. Jarrett offered a quick prayer to Silvet, god of thieves, and swigged down a small vial containing a potion of water-breathing. The thief cat would never lift a paw to save him or any other thief, but a blessing for luck and speed, that was all Jarrett needed. The water erupted in a volcanic belch of muck and slime. An angry tower of green flesh and tentacles exploded through the flying spray, lashing out in every direction. Grunvar swore and parried aside one monstrous tentacle with his axe. Aralla backed off and loosed an arrow that bounced off its rubbery hide.
Get back!
Jarrett shouted to them. Then a tentacle grabbed him. Grunvar only needed telling the once and scrambled back towards the higher ground. Aralla too backed off, loosing another arrow. This time it pierced the hide, but did not go deep. Jarrett cried out as his feet left the ground and the forceful grip of the tentacle began to crush him. "We have to help him!" Aralla shouted, but Grunvar grabbed her by the belt and hauled her back.
"No, we don't! We'll just make it more angry!"
snapped the dwarf. Jarrett flailed in the grip of the tentacle. It flexed back and tossed the thief into the huge maw. The fleshy mouth clamped shut, and the 3 eye stalks atop its head glared at the 2 surviving adventurers, daring them to act. Aralla shook her head in disappointment and self-loathing. "We just let it do it again," she groaned. "It's laughing at us." Grunvar swore as he continued to back off, tugging her belt.
"So it should. We were fools for coming back."
Aralla did not resist and fell back with him. "I don't get it."
"He's an idiot, and got an idiot's fate," snapped Grunvar. "What's there not to get?"
"Not that," said Aralla, shaking her head. "There was a moment when it threw him into its mouth. He tucked his knees and arms in, like he wanted to get swallowed." Jarrett flailed in the suffocating muscular mass of the froggy muff's stomach, submerged in acidic bilge and half-digested flotsam. Submerged, yes, but not suffocating. The potion gave him the breath he needed to shout, "Incandescent!" and the sunstone blossomed into a light that pressed into the churning murk around him. Even with the potion, his skin was burning. Time was short. He found Beskin straight away, as he was pressed up against the man's chain-clad corpse in the claustrophobic press of the stomach.
Rilevare magia!
He shouted through the stomach slop. Another light sparkled, lodged in the stomach wall. He shoved Beskin aside and pushed through the viscous mucus to force his fingers between the pulsing knots of stomach muscle. His hand closed on a smooth sphere. That had to be it. He dropped the sunstone to free his other hand and pulled out the ghost sigil. Then he wrapped an arm around Beskin's waist.
Diventare fantasma!
He shouted. Nothing happened. Jarrett gasped and had to close his eyes as the acid burned deeper. Maybe this had been a mistake after all. Then suddenly, the stomach clenched. All the contents churned around him.
Diventare fantasma!
He screamed. Still nothing. Grunvar's hands tightened on his axe as he backed off even further. Arala knocked another arrow while keeping pace with the retreating dwarf. "It's still looking at us," she whispered nervously. The froggy moth glared at them and suddenly sprang forwards in a wave of mud and water. It landed with a thunderous roar and charged, all four tentacles lashing out towards them. Arala shouted in panic, but her shot was true. It buried deep into the monster, but it was as effective as a pin in an elephant. Grunvar howled in frustration. He couldn't outrun it.
"I'll be damned if it'll take me anyway but fighting."
He charged and swung his axe. The keen edge bit deep, but then a tentacle swept him aside. Two tentacles grabbed for Arala. The ranger was swift and ducked one, but the other knocked her feet from beneath her. As the towering monstrosity loomed over them, a ghost like Jarrett dropped through the side of the froggy moth and onto the ground, holding the similarly vaporous image of a dead man. He was shouting,
Diventare Phantasma! Diventare Phantasma!
Jarrett broke off as he realized he was out. He scrambled up and away as the magic left him and he solidified. The froggy moth had 3 eyes. One eye fixed on where Grunvar had fallen, head first into the mud. The second eye was already fastened on Arala, who lay dazed as one of its tentacles swept upwards, about to slam down upon her. And the third twisted around to lock its ferocious glare onto Jarrett. It launched its 2 spare tentacles at him.
Incantasso Maximo!
Screamed Jarrett, uncaring that his voice squeaked and cracked in panic. The sunstone, still in the stomach, heard the command. It exploded. Blades of searing energy burst outwards in every direction. Green blubber and mucus spattered them all as bits of froggy moth decorated the marshy hollow in every direction and severed tentacles twirled through the air. One wrapped itself around a tree and another landed next to Grunvar. Jarrett dropped to his knees and cleared the slime off of his face.
Gods, that was close.
He gasped. Arala got to her feet, staring at the mess in astonishment as Grunvar righted himself and spun around, as if expecting a tentacle to swing at him from another direction. But no. The forest returned to its stillness for a moment. Then an insect chirped. Jarrett rose shakily to his feet and glanced down at his tunic and leather armor, stained with stomach juices. This was why he never wore good clothes while working. He arched his back to stretch out the kinks from being twisted around in the beast's stomach. Then he straightened up and beamed at them.
So I had this mad idea of doing a heist on the best guarded vault in the north. A froggy moth's stomach.
He nodded to the corpse and laughed.
Funny thing is, as promised, I met someone while on the job.
Beskin! The other 2 ran to their dead friend with a cry of relief. Jarrett closed the door to his room in the Sword and Stave, shutting out the noise of revelry below. Arala and Grunvar would drink for a week on that story, and Jarrett was content to let them do so. Beskin was in the hands of the priests in the Basilica of the Celestial Host. It turned out that Grunvar had an ancestry that earned him favors in Tirondel. While that all gave him mild satisfaction, Jarrett had little interest in fame for himself. He inspected the symphony of stars. It was as smooth as a pebble, but transparent, full of swirls of black and motes of light.
"Beautiful,"
he whispered. His hands shook with excitement as he placed the polished stone on a tripod over a flickering candle, its beeswax infused with arcane essence. Jarrett leaned close and whispered with trepidation,
"Dimi Dovai."
The candle sputtered, and the flame became intense and white. The motes of light sent out needle-like beams, painting a pattern of dark swirls and stars upon the ceiling as an unseen chorus of flutes played a magical harmony. Jarrett caught his breath. He had been right all this time. Travelers on land and sea had found their way by the stars for centuries, and the stars' symphony followed in that tradition. For it was no idle trinket, as Grundvar had supposed. It was a map. Welcome back. I hope you enjoyed our very first Tirondel tale. The Frog Heist was written by Chris Tomkins. Now that's a name you might recognize because Chris is the author of the Blackstone series. We read the first Blackstone book on my podcast. And you could download a free version of Blackstone starting this Sunday, June 29th through Thursday, the 3rd of July, on Amazon. All Chris asks in return is a review. And Chris was the voice of Jarrett in the story we just heard. And that is what's going to make this, I think, a very fun project. Because not only can you write a story for this world of Tirondel, but you can be in it. You can voice your very own character. And I think that is really cool. But it's not a requirement. I know some people would rather chop off their arm than speak on mic, and you don't have to. Either way, I'm going to promote the authors and actors from these stories in all the notes for the podcast. Let these stories be another source for how you can promote your work and get it out there for everyone else to hear and see. Okay, I'm going to wrap this up. I think you guys have heard enough of me today. The next Tirondel Tales story is already in the pipeline. It's being recorded as we speak, and hopefully you'll be hearing it very soon. And if you're enjoying the content of the Tales from the Ranger's Grove, please give me a like, a share, a follow. Just push all the buttons. Safe travels, everybody.